So welcome back. What we're going to be doing tonight is something I feel real passionate about and I'm really into. Of course, as I was preparing for tonight, I was taking an old PowerPoint I've used other times and I was trying to edit it and I thought, wow, there's a lot in here. This is going to be difficult to get through in 2 hours here, especially with a break, but I'm going to do the best I can. So, and I'm going to make you think hard, okay? So be prepared to think about things, some pretty abstract things. In fact, it was kind of challenging. One of the expectations is that we put pictures in these PowerPoints, and in philosophy, it's kind of hard because you're dealing with all these abstract concepts. It's like, okay, what's a picture of gravity or something? You know, I don't know. Anyway, that's not a real philosophical concept. But anyway, but I don't have a pesky seminary president taking all my time introducing me.
That's on record, by the way.
Yeah, I was counting on that. So. Okay, so last time one of the things I did is give you just a bunch of tips, a bunch of piece of advice when you're talking with people and sort of engaging in apologetics. And to start tonight, I want to just give a little bit example of doing that. One of the pieces of advice I gave is help people want the Christian faith to be true. Because I said, people tend they're resistant to believe what they don't want to be true. It's just the way we are, okay? So what you want to do is help people see that the good news really is good news. Unfortunately, I guess I would say most people in our culture, when they think of the teachings of Christianity, what comes to the mind for them, their understanding of it is what we would call the law. There's this God that expects you to live a certain way and holds you responsible when you don't. And so people don't, it's not good news for them. They're afraid they're in trouble with God, which of course in one sense they are, okay? But that's not the main point. That's the beginning of the story. The end of the story is that God has redeemed them. God has saved them from all that. Yes, they're not what they should be, but God has come in the flesh and redeemed us. And so God completely accepts us and forgives us and gives us eternal life. And in this sad and sorry world with all the evil and all the pain, and God is going to fix all that. It is unbelievably good news. Fortunately, most people don't know that. They don't get the good news. They just hear the law, right? So help people hear the good news. Some questions, another piece of advice I gave you was ask people questions about what they believe. Okay, it's Socratic method, right? And so here's just a little bit of advice there. So ask them this question. So to the next slide. What do you put your hope in? Okay, another question. How do you handle all the evil in the world? Right? How do you handle life and death? Right? How do you handle the situation how do you handle life and the fact that there's all this evil in the world? How do you handle this psychologically? The fact is, most people handle it by avoiding at all costs thinking about it. They entertain themselves, sports, movies, everything, just keep me distracted so I don't have to think about this. Okay, so what we're doing here is asking them the question, forcing them to think about how do you handle this? Like this evil in the world. And then, how likely is it that what you put your hope in, if they have something that they put their hope in, will actually save you or will actually help? How likely is it? Does it have the power, if you will, to solve the problem? And how likely is it that that'll happen? If you think about one popular point of view these days is naturalistic materialism. All there is nature and the material universe. That's all that exists. If you think about that point of view, it's a hopeless point of view. Even if you thought it was likely, even if you thought the evidence was that it was true, I'll try to convince you that's not true, but if you thought that, it's a bit like if you're at the horse track and you're betting on horses, and you think this one horse is going to win the race, but there's absolutely no payoff. Like, why would you bet on that horse? Okay? So anyway, get people to think about, is whatever you put your hope in likely to really solve these problems? And then, wouldn't it be good news if the teachings of Christianity were actually true? Don't you want it to be true? If they don't want it to be true, if it's not good news for them, then you pretty much know they've misunderstood it somewhere. Okay? Because it is good news. Okay? So, that's just an example of asking people questions where they're at and helping them to see that, wow, it really would be good if Christianity were true. I hope it is true. Is there some assurance that I can have that it actually is true? Okay, now I'm going to go on and talk just a little bit what I was going to talk about at the end of last time, but ran out of time, about naturalistic materialism, what I just mentioned a minute ago. I don't know how many people on the street have this point of view. Most people in our culture, I think, haven't actually thought about it enough to explicitly have this point of view. But it is very popular among people who are more university professors, people are the intelligentsia, if you will. A lot of scientists have this point of view. And it's called materialism or physicalism. It's materialism, not meaning being materialistic, like wanting to have a lot of stuff and money. It's not materialism in that sense. It's the view that the only things that really exist are material things or physical things. In other words, the things that really exist are the things that physicists talk about and everything that composed of those things. So there are electrons and protons and neutrons and molecules and cells and living things and tables and chairs and galaxies. Okay, but there isn't anything else. There isn't anything that is not physical. That's the view. So you could ask, if you're trying to diagnose where people are at, you could ask, do you think only physical things exist? Do you think there are any things that are not physical? And if they think there are non-physical things, there are other things, well, you can then probably just go on from there. Okay? But if they think, no, really, I think all there is the physical universe, there's really good reason, good evidence that that view is not true. Okay, there are certain things that we all are very familiar with that can't plausibly be explained as physical things. So the first thing is consciousness. So think about thoughts and feelings. Okay, so my thought that it's raining outside, and it's really weird to be raining in January in Edmonton. Or my feeling that I'm kind of warm right now, or my feeling of whatever, being happy. Okay? Think about those thoughts and feelings, the things that are conscious experiences. Okay? Are those physical things? In other words, are those the sort of things that physics talks about, or physics analyzes? Okay, so one easy way to get at this is to say, okay, your thought that it's raining outside. Okay, does that have the characteristics that physical things have? So for example, your thought that it's raining outside, what color is it? How much does it weigh? Okay, how fast is it going? Okay, that's just, doesn't seem like a category mistake. Like, well, my thought that it's raining outside isn't the sort of thing that has a size or a shape or a weight. It's not a physical thing. Okay. Another way to get at this, there are several sort of real famous philosophical arguments about this. And one is produced by a philosopher by the name of Ernest Nagel, who wrote an article entitled, "What is it like to be a bat?" Okay, and bat not in the sense of a baseball bat, the furry, flying kind of mouse-like thing. Okay, what is it like to be a bat? And what he talked about is bats use echolocation, right? They navigate by making sound, and the sound bounces off things and comes into their ears and somehow goes into their brain and does something. They have some kind of perception. They can tell where things are by this echolocation. Do we know what the bat is experiencing when it's using echolocation? Do we know what it feels like to know what something is, where something is, the shape and all that, just by the sound? No, we don't know what the bat is experiencing, right? Now the most plausible, if you thought that thoughts and feelings, the materialists will typically say that a thought and feeling is a certain kind of state in your brain. It's a physical event in your brain or a state of your brain or something like that. Okay, chemical electrical state of your brain. Now, Nagel's question is, okay, suppose we sort of were able to completely analyze what was going on in the brain of a bat. Like we could see that these neurons are firing and there's electrical signals going here and there, and what the chemical state of all those cells are in the bat's brain. So suppose we knew everything that was going on in that brain physically. Would we then know what the bat was feeling? Not at all. It wouldn't help at all. Okay? The only way we could conceivably do it is if we somehow correlate it with our brain states and then we have our experiences and we know what, and we sort of said, well, it had to be kind of like that. But see, that's where we're relying on our own experience and our own experiences. Okay, not the physics. Okay, so what Nagel says is, well, these conscious experiences must not be physical brain states. They must not be physical things at all. They might be, no doubt they are correlated with physical things. They're correlated with what's going on physically in your brain, but they're not those brain states themselves. Okay?
Another
I'm going to make you work real hard here. I'm going to make it a little easier a little later. I'm going kind of fast. Another famous argument was produced by a philosopher by the name of Frank Jackson, who wrote a little article called What Mary Didn't Know. And he told this story about this Mary, who is really amazing, but is, for some reason, raised in a black and white room, okay, and educated using black and white monitors. So she's never seen colors. Okay? But let's just, let's take it this way, get really hyperbolic here. Imagine that Mary has this godlike mind and actually knows the physical state, has an amazing education, knows the physical state of everything in the physical universe. In other words, she possesses all physical knowledge. Okay, knows all the physical things that exist, what state they're in, where they're at, where they're moving. She knows all of that. Okay? And then one day, somebody opens her room and gives her a red apple. Okay? She's never seen anything red before. Now here's a red apple. So somebody tells her it's a red one. Right? Has she learned anything new? Yeah. What she's learned is what it's like to see red. She's learned what a certain kind of conscious experience is like. She's learned what the experience of redness is like, right? Wait a minute. She had all physical knowledge. She knew every physical thing, the physical state of everything. In fact, she knew that about that apple, and she knew that it was red. She knew all about the wavelengths and all that. But she'd never had that experience. She learned something new. Well, if physicalism was true, she already knew everything. Because all there is physics. But she learned something new. So there must be something more to know that is covered by physics. The experience of seeing red, that experience itself, is not a physical thing. No doubt there's red light involved, and it goes into our eyes and causes things to happen in our brain, but somehow it's correlated with this experience, but the experience itself has to be something different than any physical thing. Okay? One other famous argument from recent philosophy is by David Chalmers, who gives what's famously known as the zombie argument. I remember seeing a copy of a magazine about philosophy talking about the zombie arguments, right? And zombies are kind of popular in popular culture. Anyway, Chalmers said was, can you imagine somebody who is physically exactly like us? So imagine somebody that's physically identical to me and doing everything I'm doing, including talking, right? But there's actually no consciousness up here, right? There's no conscious experience. It's just somehow I'm programmed to behave this way. Okay, is that conceptually possible? Right? Would it be a contradiction to imagine a zombie? Well, no. There's nothing incoherent about the idea of a living thing that behaves just like us, but it isn't conscious. But that shows that the consciousness is not the same thing as all that physical stuff going on inside us. Okay? So, anyway, different ways of getting at the same thing. That if the answer to any of these questions about consciousness is no, physicalism, materialism is false, reality is not, and we are not entirely physical. We're physical beings, but our consciousness seems to be something non-physical. So there's something we're deeply aware of, our own thoughts and feelings, but we typically don't analyze them that much, but anyway, and they don't seem to be physical things. Okay? So, a different kind of thing. What about values? And I mean the rightness or wrongness of actions, or goodness or badness of situations or states of affairs. Okay? So if an action is right, what's the physics of rightness? Right? Can you analyze rightness or badness of a situation? Is that something that can be reduced to physics? Well, no. It's a property. A good action has the property of being good, but that goodness isn't a physical characteristic. It's something else. Okay. So if there really are situations that are good and situations that are bad, actions that are right, actions that are wrong, if that's really true, but they're not reducible to physics, then there's more to reality than physics. There are non-physical things. Okay? Another example of something that seems not to be physical are the meanings of expressions and symbols. Okay, so think of the meaning of a word. Okay, I use the example of the word secret here. I enjoy that definition. But Okay, a word, at least well, there's even a whole philosophy about this, but the word on the screen there, as you see it, is a physical thing. Okay? The meaning of the word, is that a physical thing? Like, where is it? Is the meaning of the word secret something you'd find in your closet one day or something? Is it, how much does it really take? Where, right? It's, so expressions have meanings, but they're not anything you can analyze using physics. So there must be more to reality than physics. So, so if thoughts and feelings, if values, meanings are not physical things, then not everything is physical. There are non-physical, but real things. There's real things in reality. Now, how does this matter? Well, it matters because the obvious reality, I mean, I hope it's obvious to you that there are thoughts and feelings, there are meanings, there are values. If those realities are non-physical things, that opens the door to the existence of other spiritual realities, like God. Okay, there are other things besides physical things. Okay. In fact, if you think of those things, consciousness and values and meaning, they actually give us insight into the nature of, they open the door to something like God or non-physical spirits. Okay? So notice if I focus on the concept of God, God is a spirit. So our concept of the spirit is it's not a physical thing, right? God is a spirit who is aware, so conscious, right? Who is good, has these values, right? And whose word, for example, has meaning. Okay? So that was, let me put it this way. Philosophy of mind is a huge area of philosophy today. What I just told you about in 10 or 15 minutes, which is philosophical malpractice, to give you this much this fast. But, so you can take whole courses on this. In fact, there are books and books and books and books and articles and articles and articles, like hundreds written about this. Why? Because the dominant view among English-speaking philosophers these days is materialism. That's what they say they believe, what they want to believe, but they just can't get consciousness in particular to fit into materialism, right? If there was not a problem, there would not be any books written, or it would be, yeah, no problem, right? The whole reason why there's this enormous industry of working on philosophy of mind is precisely because consciousness just doesn't fit the material point of view, and so they keep trying, and they keep trying, and they keep trying, and I keep waiting for them to finally figure out that, maybe consciousness actually just isn't a physical thing. Another thing that happens is a lot of philosophers will identify themselves as materialists, but when you press them on what they really mean on the real view, they're not really materialists. They just want to call themselves materialists because it's popular, right? They're actually believing in the real existence of other things, but it's correlated with materialism. So with a material thing. So I'm a materialist. Well, no, not really. You're not. So I'm going to just pause now for any questions, and then I'll go on and talk about the case for a creator. Okay. So, so how the existence and nature of the universe provides compelling evidence of an intelligent creator. What I'm going to tell, my approach here, just giving credit where credit is due, is largely based on the work of a British philosopher, Richard Swinburne. He's a professor at Oxford, who I've met several times and interacted with, and I think is amazing. I'll just tell, he's published a number of works on this. I'll just tell you it's extremely difficult to read most of his stuff. The last thing I'm mentioning there is the little book, Is There a God? That's more accessible. Okay? It's all great stuff, but it's really hard work understanding it. There are other sources that you can use here, actually, and this is just kind of a general piece of advice about resources to use for apologetics. The fact is, there's a wealth of material out there. If you go to, there's so much, I'm reluctant to point to any particular one. Like, there's Ravi Zacharias, you may have heard of. I think he's great. But there, if you look at most of the major Christian publishers, they usually have some really good stuff in apologetics. Most of it is good. So I'll mention several. There's a little book called Science of Intelligence, or Signs of Intelligence by Dembski. So I'm going to be there. You have some articles that kind of present the sort of thing I'm talking about today. There's a book called Reasons for the Hope Within by Michael Murray, who I was a grad student with. There's another book I really like is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Geisler and Turek, Crossway Publishing. Anyway, just a few examples, but there's a lot out there. So, okay, so where are we going to go here now? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a really sort of a crash course in scientific reasoning. So I'm going to talk about how scientific reasoning works. And then I'm going to talk about the evidence. And then, so seeing how reasoning, the way scientists reason, on the basis of what we observe, basically the existence and nature of the universe, will lead you toward belief in God. And then I'm going to present it in the way that I recommended before about, well, here's a series of questions to ask people for thinking it through. Okay. So, okay. So how does scientific reasoning work? Scientific reasoning, I think you're ahead of me here. You know what? I got my pages turned around here. Where is the right? I see what happened. Okay, well, suddenly this presentation is two-sided. So. Okay. First of all, this is something you really need to know in general, because a lot of people you talk to are very enthusiastic about science, but fundamentally misunderstand. Okay. And one of the things you need to know is that science is theoretical. And what I mean by that is that science it proposes theories to explain things. The theories that science proposes to explain things are never something you can directly observe to be true or false. Okay? So a couple examples to show you that science is always theoretical. Scientific theories always involve universal generalizations. So if you think about, say, Newton's physics, where one of the formulas is that F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. Okay. Notice that it doesn't say, well, that's the way it works in Edmonton, but I don't know how it works somewhere else. Right? It doesn't say that's the way it works on Earth, but who knows where else in the galaxy, whatever. Newton's theory is, no, force equals mass times acceleration everywhere in the universe for all time. So it's this universal generalization. And that's the way scientific theories are. They're universal generalizations. If scientists are talking about, physicists are talking about electrons, okay, they're not just talking about, well, the electrons around here. They're talking about electrons in general. Okay? Now, have we, so it's back to Newton, F equals ma. Have we observed that everywhere in the universe? Well, we can't possibly, right? So we can do some experiments here, and then we infer, well, this is the way it is always everywhere. And it goes way beyond what we've actually observed. Okay? And that's why it's theoretical. Okay? It's never proven true. It may be highly probably true, but it's never proven true. Okay? Also, scientific theories almost always refer to not only things that haven't been observed, they refer to things that are unobservable, that we can't observe, ever, like electrons. You know, how many people have seen an electron? No one, ever. Okay? When scientific theories refer to the distant past, who saw it? None of us. Okay? Right? Yeah. Scientific theories typically refer to unobservable things. And that shows that it's a theory. The reason we call it a theory is it goes beyond what we've observed or can observe. Okay? So there's always the possibility that it's wrong. Okay? Now, don't make this mistake. Some people will say, well, that's just a theory. If you're talking to a scientist, that's sort of, you're confused about how they use the word theory. When they reserve the word theory for a general statement about how a certain realm of things work, that's been really well worked out and has a lot of evidence in its favor. Okay, so in everyday life we use the word theory to mean like it's a guess, right? That's not the way scientists use it. They're not going to call something a theory unless it's got a lot going for it. Okay, so that's their concept. So, okay, so science is theoretical. It's always positing theories to explain what we observe. But it's based on observation. Okay? Scientists infer from what they observe in the lab. Okay? They infer from what they observe that certain theories or hypotheses are true or false, right? Depending on the case. Okay? But let's focus on truth. Scientific evidence never absolutely proves a theory to be true. Okay? Sometimes there's a scientific revolution where a theory, a generally accepted theory that was reigning for a long time, gets overthrown. And the scientists see that, oh, you know what? That doesn't work. That must be false. And they come to adopt a new theory. Okay? So, but that's always a possibility in science. Okay? At best, the evidence can only show that a theory is probably true. It can never show that it, absolute proof. It's not in the realm of science. That's in the realm of mathematics, not in the realm of biology, chemistry, physics. Okay? Okay, now here's the question. How does this work? In other words, how can you observe things that you observe, that you can see with detect with your senses? How can you infer from that to things that you can't observe? How does the logic of that work? Okay. Notice that if people, if you encounter anybody who is criticizing or won't accept the Christian point of view because it talks about things that you can't observe, just tell them that they have to reject all of science. All of it. Because it's all theoretical. Okay? It's all about things you can't observe. So, and usually they think they think they're being scientific, and actually what they're saying is quite contrary to science. So, but how does this reasoning work? There's different ways, how does scientific reasoning work? There's different ways of explaining this, but here's, I think, the best way to understand scientific reasoning. Science uses what's called, what logicians have called argument to the best explanation. In other words, they observe certain things, and they infer from those things what provides the best explanation for what they're observing. Okay? They believe in the best explanation of what they observe. And we do this all the time in everyday life. Okay, so in my office today, I was looking out the window and I saw a puddle on the sidewalk. Okay, what do you think I could infer from that? What did I infer from that?
It's warm.
It's warm for January and everything. That's really warm, right? It's warm out. It's above freezing. Okay. How does that inference work? Well, it's because hypothesizing that it's warm out, will provide an explanation for why there's liquid water on the sidewalk. Okay? Now, I could make up other explanations. I could hypothesize that, well, somebody put electric coils under that section of the sidewalk and warmed it up. So even though it's -20 out, this particular, right? I could hypothesize that there's a fairy that is warming that particular block of sidewalk. I could say there's some kind of radiation from space that's just heating up that particular thing. I could, actually, there are infinitely many possible explanations. Okay, you could just make them up ad infinitum. But somehow, this one is better. It's more plausible. It's, okay, let me give you another example. Suppose I see some, what look like, well, tracks in foot shapes going across the lawn in the snow. Okay? What would I infer from that? Somebody walked across the lawn. Okay? That's what I would infer. Of course, I can come up with other explanations. I could say, well, there was a really weird lightning bolt that struck and it made just that pattern in the snow. Or there was somebody being suspended from a helicopter who made footprints. Or one person made one print, and then another person made another print, another person made another print, another print. Right? Again, I can make up possible explanations infinitely, actually. But we don't find them plausible. We don't believe them. We kind of stick with this one I was suggesting. Well, what is it that makes for the, among the many possible explanations, and logically there are always infinitely many actually, okay, how do we pick the best one? Well, there's three basic characteristics. The first is plausibility. And that's basically what fits in best with the rest of what we know. Okay? So that picture doesn't seem to fit in very well with our conception of things. It's conceptually possible, but unlikely, right? So my example of the lightning bolt, right, it just doesn't seem very plausible. It's very unlikely that that would happen, right? Or the same with the helicopter. Okay. Okay, so how does it fit in with the rest of what we know? Second characteristic of a good explanation is that it's simple. Okay? Now this might surprise you about science, but scientists always prefer the simplest hypothesis, the simplest explanation. If they've got some phenomenon that they're trying to explain, and there are two theories that can equally well explain that phenomenon, they will always go for the simpler one. Okay? And as I said, there are always infinitely many possible explanations, conceptually. What do they go for? They go for the simplest one. Okay? This is kind of shocking to say, because philosophers don't agree on anything. But among philosophers of science and among scientists, there is actually no disagreement about this, that simplicity is a huge factor in scientific reasoning. Scientists always prefer the simpler explanation. Okay? There's disagreement about exactly why, if you get into the details, but there's no question that simplicity is a huge factor. Okay. Well, actually, let me give a couple examples of that. You remember when, well, we weren't there, so we don't remember it that way, but we learned that people used to believe, there was a Ptolemaic understanding of the universe and the solar system, right? The sun was in the center, and, no, sorry, Ptolemy. The earth was in the center, okay, and everything else was going around the earth. Well, this fit the observation, if you observe the night sky, you have the stars all kind of in lockstep, kind of going across the sky, right? Okay, they're going around the earth, that's the way it looks, right? Then you have the planets. Of course, they didn't know they were planets, they were just stars, but they were peculiar stars because what was weird about them is that they moved relative to the other stars. They didn't stay in the same place, right? So they were the wandering stars. Okay, the idea was celestial beings, things out there away from Earth, were divine. They were perfect. And the perfect shape, the divine shape, is a circle. Okay, so those things out there, those celestial beings, were going in perfect circular orbits around Earth. Works great for the stars. The planets are a problem. Because what happens is they'll move across this, if you observe from day to day to day, and across weeks and months. They'll move, and then they'll slow down and stop and back up. Slow down and stop, and then keep moving. What is going on there? In fact, it doesn't seem to fit the theory of everything celestial work going in a perfect circle, right? Well, there's an easy solution to that. What's happening is these particular stars, these planets, are going in circular orbits around a circular orbit. So you take the circle, and then you have something that's going in a circle around the circle, and you get this, okay, it's going forward, now it slows down and backs up, it's going, oh, now it's going forward again. Okay, now Ptolemy, that system worked extremely well for analyzing what was going on in the night sky across weeks and months and years. And they could predict, like, I mean, even go back to biblical times, the Babylonians and stuff, they could predict what was going to happen in the sky 5 years from now. They had analyzed it, they could predict it, so you could explain what you're observing very well this way. Then comes along Copernicus, who said, no, the sun is in the center, and the earth is one of the planets going around the sun among the others. Radical idea. Now, what won the day for Copernicus over Ptolemy? It isn't that the evidence fit Copernicus's view better than Ptolemy's. It's that Copernicus's view is simpler. Okay, that you could add other details, but basically that's it. It's a simpler point of view, and that's what won the day. Another example is Newton, the greatest physicist in the history of physics. Newton, talking about the way, before him, people thought, again, that celestial things work differently than things on Earth. Okay, so we have certain laws that govern how things work on Earth, but out there in the celestial realm, things work differently. Okay, well, he came up with laws of motion, so and a theory of universal gravitation, the principle of inertia, where you could explain why the pen falls when I drop it, and also why the planets move the way they do. The same laws. Newton won the day. Why? Because his theory is simpler. Because he can have one set of simple laws that explains everything, what happens on Earth, and also what's happening in the heavens. Okay. So anyway, simplicity, that's the way science works. Okay. We always favor the simple theory. Okay. Last criterion for a good explanation is explanatory power. A theory that explains a lot and explains it well is always preferred to something that explains less or explains it not as well. Okay? What does explaining well amount to? It amounts to the evidence is what you would expect if the theory were true, but not if the theory were false. Okay, so going back to my theory of the person walking across the lawn, right? What makes that a good explanation? Well, because if you imagine that somebody walked across the lawn, what evidence would you expect to see? Footprints. What you see is exactly what you'd expect if the theory were true. Would you expect to see footprints if somebody didn't walk across the lawn? No. Okay? So it's all about what, if the evidence is what you'd expect if the theory were true, but not if the theory were false. Okay. All right. So we infer what's the best explanation of the evidence, and that's on the basis of how plausible it is, how simple it is, and whether it explains the phenomenon well. Okay. Correct. That's my crash course in scientific reasoning, and we'll apply it in a bit. Okay. Now, one of the main factors in scientific reasoning is simplicity. You always favor the simple theory over the more complex theory. What I want you to see, and this may surprise you, but theism, the view that there's one God that's the creator of everything else, is an unbelievably simple view. And I know we have all kinds of individual beliefs about the nature of God, different characteristics that we believe God has, different things we know about God. But the basic concept is extremely simple. It's sort of like, if you think of the force of gravity, which actually you might think about gravity. Have you ever seen gravity, heard gravity, tasted gravity? I would say you haven't even felt gravity. You've felt the effects of it. Okay? You don't observe gravity itself. You observe the effects of it. The effects of gravity are unbelievably complex. They're everywhere in the universe. But the theory of gravity, that there's this force that everything with mass is attracted to everything else, that's an incredibly simple theory. Okay? It's a simple concept. What I want you to see is that the same thing applies to theism. Okay. First, I think this is a philosophical thesis, and not everybody will believe this, but I think that the basic concept of God can be boiled down to a single being with unlimited power. I think everything else about God, the basic nature of God, can be deduced from that. Even if God has unlimited power, God can know things, so God would be aware. God would not be susceptible, being unlimited in power, God would not be susceptible to being tempted to do bad things. Okay? Seeing that something is good would be a reason to do good things, so God would be perfectly good. This is really quick, but anyway, the concept of God is incredibly simple. Okay. The concept of God is self, and that everything else is caused by that one thing is an incredibly simple view. Everything starts with one thing that causes everything else. Okay? Incredibly simple view. Okay. Now, let's think about it's hard to find pictures for what I'm talking about here. This is the best I can do. A being that has no limits, or a being that has certain limits, which is the simpler view. Say, or flip it around, a being that has infinite power, or a being that has 8 units of power. Do you have any intuitions about that? Which is the simpler concept?
No limits.
No limits.
Yeah, it's actually a simpler concept. Just no limits, or, well, there's a certain limit, certain finite amount of power. Okay, an unlimited being is a simpler concept than a limited being. Okay.
What makes that simpler? Like, what I guess, what is our definition of simple?
It's very difficult to define, and there are many facets of it, and Swinburne has written a whole book on that. So, I guess I'm going to just rely on your intuitions there. Let me put it. Let me try this. If the ultimate cause of the universe has 1,000 units of power, what's the question that occurs to you? Why 1,000?
Yeah, why
units of power?
that's
Rather than 1,001,
Right.
or 1,010, or 99, or right? Whereas saying there are no limits, so unlimited, or has infinite power, it's a simpler concept. It's not puzzling why there isn't something with more power than unlimited power, because you can't have more power than unlimited power, right? Okay.
Okay.
Maybe another way to think about this is the number 0 is a simpler number than the number 85. Okay? So having 0 limits is simpler than having 85 limits. Okay. You don't have to buy every bit of this argument, you just get the general concept. So, now. Okay, so theism is the view that, just making sure that the same things like that. A single being of unlimited power caused everything else. Okay, just saying that's an incredibly simple view. Now, here's where it would be. Relevant. And I'm trying to decide when to take our break. So I'm going to just get started on this, and then we'll take our break and come back to it. Okay. First, I'm going to talk about 2 pieces of evidence: the existence of the universe and the nature of the universe. So if you start with the existence of the universe. Why does the universe exist? Okay, this is a really good question to ask people. Why is there all? In fact, the way philosophers often put it is, why is there something rather than nothing? Like, why? Why does this exist? Right? What would be the best explanation for why this is all here? Okay? In fact, how could you explain the existence of all this, of the whole universe? Now, if you ask people this in our culture, say, why, how do you explain the existence of the universe? What do you think they're going to say?
It just happens.
Chance.
Okay, okay. They might give that's a more abstract answer.
Big Bang
Okay.
Theory, whatever.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. So thanks very much.
I didn't want to say that.
Okay, but they might say it's by chance.
But that is by chance.
Okay, so Big Bang. Okay. Now, the first thing is, I think it's a mistake to think of the Big Bang as an explanation for the existence of God. The Big Bang is the existence of the universe. The Big Bang is really a theory about the early history of the universe. It's when the universe was young and what it was doing. The universe already exists. Okay, so you're talking about the Bang is this theory that there's this explosion and everything's going like this, right? That eventually led to galaxies and stars and us. Okay, it's not really an explanation of the existence of the universe. Okay, but let that go. What's the obvious question then? Well, what caused the Big Bang? Okay, what's the causal explanation? Even if you say it's by chance, there has to be some setup, right? Things don't happen by chance unless there's some chance scenario, like throwing dice or something. There has to be something where that's a possibility, okay? Well, how do you explain that? And suppose you say, well, there's this other thing that caused the Big Bang. It might have been, there's this view that the universe was sort of it was expanding, and then it contracted and collapsed, and then it banged again. So there's this kind of a yo-yo theory, right? Okay, suppose it was caused by the collapse of the previous universe. Well, what caused that? You see where we're going. What caused that? What caused that? What caused that? Okay. So there's really two possibilities here. Either there's been an infinite regress of causes, so one thing caused by a previous thing, which was caused by a previous thing, which was caused by a previous thing, and that's always been going on forever into the past. Or there was some first thing that got the whole thing started. Okay? Now let's just focus on that one. Suppose there was a first thing. Which is more plausible, or which is the simpler idea, that the first thing has unlimited power or had limited power? Limited power. If you say unlimited power, I think, if you think the concept through, you get God. Okay? So, putting it all together, there's really three possibilities. There's this infinite regress. Basically, there's just always been things going on, physical things going on. Or it all started with one thing that's either limited or unlimited. So infinite regress of limited things, a first limited cause, or a first unlimited cause. Now, which is the simplest view? The simplest view is that it all started with one unlimited thing that caused everything else. That's the simplest view. Okay? Okay, incredibly simple view. Here.
Interestingly, the moment you have or posit a limited being, you're pretty close to polytheism. That's where it leads.
Sure, you've got a limited God or something.
Yeah.
You have a limited something. You might have many, I'm simplifying here. You could say there's many first causes. But okay, suppose all this is caused by 13 different things that together caused all this. Which is simpler, one thing or 13 things? One thing. Okay. Okay, one other thing, and then we will really take a break. To show that the existence of the universe is evidence for God, think about what would you expect? Which would you expect more? If you assume that there's a God, just assume that God exists. How surprising is the existence of the universe? Not that surprising,
No.
because it seems like this the sort of thing God might want to do. Okay? And you can explain it. Okay? If you assume God does not exist, how surprising is the existence of the universe? Very surprising. Very puzzling. Like, how did that happen? Right? So, would you expect the existence of the universe more if you assume God or assume not God? No God. It's more to be expected if you assume God than not. So therefore, the postulate, the hypothesis that God exists provides an explanation for the existence of the universe. Okay. Okay.
Two questions from Richard.
Okay, we've got a couple questions here.
First one is from Hildegard,
Okay?
and she comments or asks the question, a being with X limits needs to be explained in detail. A being with no limits needs no further description. Question mark.
Oh, I thought, thanks for agreeing with me. And then she put a question mark. Yes, I think that's a good so you need, it's puzzling when you say there's something with a certain amount of power, certain limits, why those rather than others. But when you get to something that's unlimited, that's sort of, well, it's certainly not puzzling why it doesn't have more power or less limits, right? Think about it in another way. This is the way actually Swinburne likes to put it. So, where's the more natural point to end explanation? There's going to be an end of explanation somewhere. Where's the more natural point? At something that has a certain finite amount of power, or at something that's unlimited? Well, it's natural to start with something that is unlimited because it can't be caused by something with more power. It can't. Actually, it can't go any further than that, right? So, yeah, anything that's caused by something else, the cause has to have at least as much power as the effect.
Yeah.
So something can be caused by something greater, caused by something greater, caused by something, well, when you get to the greatest possible being, an unlimited being, you can't go further than that. So it's the natural stopping point for explanation. Okay, was there another one?
One more there from Richard. Can we say physical matter cannot be compatible with infinity?
Physical matter can't be. I think all physical things, yes, okay, right, in one sense. All physical things have limits, right? All physical things have a limited amount of power. They have limited capacities for causing other things, if you will. Okay. Now, of course, as far as I know, God might have created infinitely many physical things. In fact, there's this view that there's actually a multiverse, that there isn't just one universe, that maybe there's infinitely many universes. And I actually think, why not? I mean, believing in a God that we believe in, God wants infinitely many universes, why not? In fact, that seems pretty cool. I think he'd probably do that. Anyway, so we're going to break. 10-minute break, and then we'll come back.
If we have.
Okay, let's get started again. So congratulations, you've made it through the most difficult part of this course. Okay. So everything is easier from here. I'm still going to tax you a little bit in the next 40 minutes or so, but it's easier than what I've been throwing at you right now. Easier conceptually. The main point I want you to see is that the belief that all of everything that exists is caused ultimately by one ultimate thing with unlimited power is the simplest way of understanding all of reality. Okay? I guess there would be one simpler view, and that's that nothing exists. But we're pretty sure that's not true. So this is the simplest explanation. And simplicity, choosing the simpler theory is always to be preferred to a more complex theory. Okay? So it's the best explanation. That's the argument. Okay, so that was about just the existence of the universe. Why does it exist? God provides the simplest possible explanation. Okay, what about the order in the universe? The order, or the universe has many different aspects, kinds of order, structure. The universe is not chaotic. It's not like just anything can happen at any moment, right? When I let go of this pen, I know it's going to happen. I know it's going to fall. Wow, it did. No, the world works by these patterns, and there's all kinds of structure. It's actually what makes life possible. You can imagine a world where there weren't laws of nature and you never knew what was going to happen. You wouldn't know what to do, right? Because if I wanted to leave this room, I wouldn't know whether I should jump or try to walk through the wall or whistle or right? So our lives, we rely on the world works certain ways. There's certain patterns. There's laws of nature. Okay. So one of the kinds of order then in the universe, in reality, is the laws of nature, like the law of gravity. Everything is attracted to everything else, proportional to their mass, inversely proportional to their distance apart, or roughly, because Einstein came along and made it more complicated. But Newton was kind of close. So, and in a sense, that's what science is all about, trying to find the laws of nature. Okay. In fact, I'll talk a little bit about the laws of nature. Why do the laws of nature hold? Okay, well, scientists can sometimes explain certain laws of nature by higher order laws of nature. Okay, so for example, before Newton, there were laws of planetary motion. People had figured out that the planets go in circular orbits, well, elliptical, but roughly circular orbits around the sun. So that was a law of nature. Newton explained why the planets go in circular orbits around the sun through his theory of universal gravitation and principle of inertia, okay? Which applies to everything, not just planets, okay? So there's lower level laws that are explained by higher level laws, which can be explained by higher level laws. And there's actually a hierarchy where you have a number of laws that are explained by fewer laws, explained by fewer laws. And really, where physicists are going is trying to find the one ultimate law. And there's still some problems, right? In their best theories, they have different theories that work really well in different phenomena, but they're actually inconsistent with each other. So it's, okay, but they're trying to find one ultimate theory. By the way, notice that pattern. Many explained by fewer, explained by fewer, explained by fewer, presumably ultimately explained by one. Does that sound reminiscent? All of this caused by fewer, ultimate, one ultimate cause.
Except
It's the
Stephen
same.
Hawking has his own idea about it.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So the laws of nature are one aspect of the order in the universe. Another aspect of the order of the universe is just the structure in the universe, and you can go from big to small. You can go from, there's all these galaxies with stars and nebula and all that kind of stuff, and go down to solar system planets, living things on Earth, cells, molecules, composed of atoms, composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and then there's this whole universe of subatomic particles, things that are smaller than atoms, that are really weird, and there's all kinds of them, and they're flying, and there are all kinds of them flying right through you right now, these particles. Okay, it's bizarre. So anyway, this structure, but it's not just chaotic, right? It all has this structure to it. Okay, another type of the order in the universe is the way the universe seems fine-tuned for life. And in a minute I'm going to talk about that, but just the basic idea is that there's all these factors in physics where if there had been slightly different, there wouldn't be a universe anything like this, and there could be no life. We wouldn't be here. Okay, many different factors. It all seemed, okay, this is just right for us to be here, this is just right for us to be here, this is just right for us to be here, this is just right. How did that happen? Okay, so the physicists were the first ones who sort of pointed this out, that it looks like somebody was tweaking the dials, right? Somebody was just setting everything just right. And all these different factors, it's not like, well, things have to be like that. It's, for example, the force of gravity. Why is it as strong as it is, rather than stronger or weaker? Right? There isn't, okay? So all these things were, they're just right for us to be here. Next thing, the diversity and complexity of life on Earth. Okay, so we have all these living things, incredibly complicated. Okay, and that's a kind of order in the world. Another kind of order that we see the universe full of, if you pay attention, is beauty. There's beauty everywhere. The universe is a beautiful place. And I think, actually, I think if you look anywhere, and you look at that wall, that beautiful wood paneling. Anyway, the world is full of beauty. Then there is the existence and nature of people. Okay, we are weird and wonderful things, and very complicated things, but ordered things. And okay, so all these different kinds of order in the universe. Now let me go back a little bit and talk about the fine-tuning. So the order in the universe is just what it needs to be in order for there to be life and for us to be here. So for example, and yeah, if any of them had been slightly different, the universe would be radically different. We wouldn't be here. So, and let me just give you some examples here. As I said, the strength of gravity. Let's just accept, okay, if you're arguing with somebody about this, they probably will try to explain all this with the Big Bang. And actually, I don't have a problem with the Big Bang for apologetics, because I think it's just fine. I'll go with that. I can argue for God very effectively with the Big Bang. The strength of gravity has to be just right to end up with a universe like this from the Big Bang. Because if gravity had been stronger, the universe would have banged and it would have collapsed again. Okay? If it was weaker, everything would have just flying apart, and we wouldn't have had galaxies and stars and planets and us. Okay, strength of gravity has to be just right. The forces holding atoms together. So there are forces, inside the atom that keeps the protons and electrons, attracts them to each other, so the atom doesn't just fall apart. But it also they're repelled to each other so that the atom doesn't collapse. Okay. Well, if those forces within the atom hadn't been just right, you wouldn't have atoms. So you wouldn't have molecules, and you certainly wouldn't have living things, and you wouldn't have us. Okay? The speed of light had to be what it is. It couldn't be significantly different to have a universe like this, including living things, including us. Okay? The masses of basic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, have to be what they are in order to have a universe like this. Focus on the Big Bang. If the expansion of the universe had been faster, again, everything would have just spread out and been a fine mist, and nothing significant would have formed. Okay? If it had been slower, the whole thing would have collapsed. Okay? It has to be just right. In fact, it has to be very smooth, but not perfectly smooth. By that I mean the matter flying apart from the Big Bang has to be roughly the same amount of matter flying in every direction. Very close to very smooth. But it has to be just a little bit lumpy. Okay? So you get stars and galaxies and planets. Okay? Can't be perfectly smooth. Okay? So there's all these factors that are just right for us to be here. for there to be living things, have a universe like this. So, how would you explain that? Okay, well, let's just think about that a little bit. What's a non-God explanation?
Still goes back to chance.
You could say chance. Now, it's hard to see how the actual laws of nature could be determined by chance. Like, what are the things that cause the laws of nature,
Yeah.
right?
Could it be probability?
Okay, well, that's another way of saying chance. I mean, like you say, this happened, yeah, it happened by chance. But what I want you to see is, and this is how the fine-tuning argument goes, is that, well, suppose this all happened by chance. What's the probability that we ended up with this on the chance hypothesis? What's the probability? What do you think?
Pretty low.
Unspeakably low. Like, and mathematicians have analyzed this and just say, you know, this is the probability of getting this outcome by chance is so low. Well, in every other context, you'd say forget it. Like, no way. It's sort of like the tracks in the snow and saying it was caused by lightning. Is it possible? Well, yeah.
That's not probable.
What's the probability? It's so ridiculously low, forget it. Right? It wouldn't be rational to believe that. Right? So you have all these factors that are just what you need. If you say it happened by chance, you wouldn't, the probability of getting this evidence by chance is so low that it wouldn't be rational to believe that as an explanation. Okay. Unless you really don't want the alternative. Okay?
Is that the reason for the expansion? What am I trying to say? When I was in school 50 years ago, the theory of evolution said the world was several million years old. Now they're into the billions. And I'm wondering, is it because mathematically the probability, the chance deal is just, you got to give it.
Yeah, in terms of evolution,
Need more
you just
time.
need way more time.
Yeah.
Need way more
Right?
time.
It's, if you're having, let's put it this way, if you're having things done by chance, if you have many tries, and you do try it enough times, you increase the probability of getting the outcome you're interested in. Okay. So actually, on this fine-tuning argument, the main alternative is the many worlds hypothesis that says, okay, there's only one way I can make this outcome anything but unbelievably unlikely. That is that this universe, this Big Bang, wasn't the only one. In fact, there were millions of them. Actually, no, that's not enough. Infinitely many. I mean, some unspeakably big number. Okay. If you do it infinitely many times, okay, so there's infinitely many universes, then one of those times is probably going to come out like this. Okay. Okay, now let's think about simplicity now. Compare these two. Well, the other option is that there's actually an intelligence that has the power to create this and design things, set the laws of nature what they need to be, set things up in just the right way to get this, right? So, in terms of simplicity, which is simple? Infinitely many universes governed by chance, one ultimate intelligent cause. Okay, it's pretty obvious which is simple, which is simpler. Okay. Think about it another way. Suppose there's infinitely many universes governed by chance. Why? Like, why are there these infinite many universes? You still have to explain that, right? There needs to be a setup. How do you explain that? Whereas when you get to God, you get to one ultimate thing that is unlimited power. You come to a natural stopping point for explanation. Okay. I have no problem with the multiverse. There actually being infinitely many universes. But that's actually for theological reasons. I think that's the sort of thing God would probably do. I have no issues with that, right? But if I didn't believe in God, and I'm choosing between one ultimate cause or this hypothesizing infinitely many universes which we cannot have concrete evidence for any of them. It's pure hypothesis, right? Well, which, by the principles of scientific reasoning, the simpler explanation is that the ultimate cause is one. So, okay. Living things. Living things are incredibly complicated working, reproducing systems. Contrary to what Darwin thought, see, Darwin thought that as you get smaller, you get simpler. Okay, so when you get down to a single cell, that's a really simple blob. And so you explain, yeah, at the macro level, what we can see at this level, things look kind of complicated, but they're actually made of a few simple parts. Biochemistry has shown that that's not true at all. Actually, as you get smaller, it gets more complicated. You get into the workings of an individual cell, and there's all this really complicated molecular machinery going on there. There's these incredibly complex molecules that are machines. The way they travel, they interact with each other, they wind and they unwind, and it's unbelievably complicated, and that's in one cell. So it's hard to see, because even the simplest cell is incredibly complicated, and the cell is the smallest unit of life. Okay, it's hard to see how life could have risen in the first place by chance. It's one of the big problems in biology about how do you explain the origins of the first living thing. Regardless what you say about evolution, how do you get that first cell? It's really, it's a problem. Okay, that's a graphic of a DNA molecule, right? Just one little tiny segment. It's a lot bigger than that, right? And incredibly complicated. And you need that complex molecule to have anything living. Okay, how do you get that? Okay. It's also hard to see. Now, I'm more open to people who debate this, but for me, it's hard to see how how living things could evolve substantially new and different basic structures, right? There's all kinds of variation among living things, but to get from one kind of living thing to another kind of living thing where there's some completely new structure there, it's hard to see how you can get from here to there. Okay. There's also the fact that it's hard, if you look at the fossil record, to me, it doesn't look like what you'd expect, at least on a Darwinian version of evolution, because you get things just kind of appearing where there's nothing before it. And you get things that kind of tool along in the fossil record and then disappear. You don't get this, and you don't get all these nice transitions between things, right? Which you'd expect on a Darwinian understanding of evolution. It seems like there's sharp transitions. Okay, so and I gave you the piece of advice earlier: don't argue with people about evolution. and actually, I have a friend who's a biologist at the U of A who's absolutely convinced of evolution, but he also thinks the whole thing is so incredible
that God must have done it.
That God must have done it.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly what he said. Even if you think that's the way So I have no issues with people who think that that's the history. What I have issues with people is when they think that's the history and it all happened by accident. Like, all happened by accident. I'm sorry, that's just too incredible. The probability of that happening is just so ridiculous that I just can't buy it. So, okay, so go back, the questions that I would ask people. How do you explain the existence of the universe? Right? Is there a simpler, more plausible, and more powerful explanation than God? Okay? Again, powerful explanation is this is what you'd expect given that hypothesis, not otherwise. The universe isn't that surprising, assuming God. If you assume not God, it's really mysterious. Why is this here? Okay, so isn't the universe very surprising if you don't assume the existence of God? Okay. How do you explain the order in the universe? Why the law, again, these different factors of order. Why the laws of nature hold? It is ultimately very mysterious. You remember I said that there's these laws of nature that can be explained by higher level laws, explained by higher level laws, and they hope they'll get to one. Why does that one law of nature hold? As far as anybody can tell, it's all contingent. In other words, there's no reason why it has to be that way. It could have been somewhere else, some other way. Why is it that way? Right? Why does it hold? The person who believes in God has a very simple explanation. Those laws of nature hold because God wants it to hold. God is in control of everything and wants the universe to follow certain patterns. Okay? He wants, in terms of gravity, he wants things to be attracted to each other in just the way they are. He could have made it different, but he's designed it all so that it all works together. Okay? The structure of the universe, why do we have it, from galaxies down to subatomic particles? Why is there all this structure? Well, God designed it that way, right? It's hard to explain otherwise. The way the universe, how do you explain the way the universe is fine-tuned? Again, we already talked about it. Chance, but the probability of getting this by chance is just stupid. I'll put on, I think I do this later. Okay, I'll keep on going. The diversity and complexity of life on Earth, we've already talked about. The beauty in the universe. Actually, how surprising is it, if you assume that God exists, how surprising is it that the universe is full of beauty and that we have the capacity to recognize it and appreciate it? It's not surprising. It's the sort of thing that seems like a God would want to do, right? That the universe is a beautiful place and we have the capacity to recognize and appreciate it, I think is quite mysterious if you don't assume God. All the beautiful things that we're moved by, why is it like that? Okay, so the beauty is more to be expected if you assume God than if you assume God doesn't exist. That fact alone, by the principles of scientific reasoning, shows that it's evidence in favor of the existence of God. Okay? The existence and nature of people. So why are there beings, people who are aware of things, can appreciate things, can enjoy things, who work with other people and can accomplish things together and care about each other and love each other and can do things that matter in life and produce good results and actually have the capacity to choose between doing good things or doing evil things. So you think about the nature of human beings that way. Okay? Think about our concept of human beings, our understanding of human society. How surprising is it that there are people with histories and natures and all that? How surprising is it that there are people if you assume that God exists? Assume God.
Yeah. Right.
How surprising is it that there are people? Not that surprising, right? It seems like the sort of thing God might want to do. God might want to create other beings that can appreciate Him, that He can care for, that can care for each other, that can do meaningful things, that can enjoy the world that they're in. Okay, this seems like a good thing that God would be interested in doing. Okay, how surprising is it that there are human beings if you assume there's no God? Very surprising. I mean, even if you sort of think, well, it could have happened by chance somehow, even if you say that, what's the probability? Ridiculously low, right? Okay? So, the existence of human beings is much more to be expected assuming God than assuming there is no God. Okay? So therefore, that's evidence that supports the existence of God. Again, remember, the scientific reasoning, you believe in what provides the simplest explanation. It leads you to expect the evidence you have. Okay? Well, God, the hypothesis of God leads us to expect human beings much more than if we assume God doesn't exist. Okay. Okay. So God would obviously provide an excellent explanation of all this order. God would be interested in doing this, would be able to do this. It's a simple explanation. Okay. So going through the factors, the God hypothesis is plausible in the sense that we have experience of, with our experience of human beings as intelligent creatures who create things. Okay, it fits in with our experience of the world. We can also bring in evidence from the Bible. We'll be talking about that next time. Personal experiences. Anyway, it's not. I'm not going to say that if you had no evidence at all, you would just posit the existence of God, right? But compared to alternative total theories, it's high on the plausibility rating because it's the simplest. Which leads us to the second concept, or criterion for scientific reasoning or explanation. The concept of God is extremely simple. That there's only one God, that everything else comes from God, and that all God's characteristics can be summarized in that one statement. Another way of saying that is the greatest possible being. Incredibly simple hypothesis. And then the third criterion is that it's explanatorially powerful. So it explains a lot. It leads you to expect it more than if you don't posit the existence of God. Okay, let's go to, is there a better explanation? Remember I said scientific reasoning uses its argument to the best explanation. Is there a better explanation of all this? Okay. Well, two possibilities that we've already touched on a little bit is chance or necessity. Okay. You could say maybe it all has to be like this. This is the sort of thing philosophers do. They think there is possibility. Well, maybe it has to be like this. The problem with that is nobody has a clue. If it has to be like this, nobody has a clue why. Like, not a clue. Right? It all looks contingent. All of it, all the laws of nature look like they could have been different than they are. Why are they exactly the way they are? Okay, it doesn't look necessary at all. So the best reasoning is, no, it's not necessary. Okay. The alternative is to happen by chance. The problem with that is that the probability of getting all this by chance is just ridiculously low. So that makes it a weak explanation. Okay, like the gravity happened to make those footprints in the snow, right? Well, that's not what you'd expect. Sorry, did I say gravity?
Right.
What I was thinking
Lightning.
was,
Lightning.
I said lightning?
No, you said
No,
gravity.
you
You
said
said
gravity.
gravity.
Said
He
gravity
thought-
this time.
But he thought lightning.
Okay, delete the last name. Lightning producing footprints in the snow. Possible, but it's extremely unlikely that you'd get that evidence, that phenomenon, on that hypothesis, so it's a bad explanation. It's a weak explanation. Could all this happen by chance? Let's suppose hypothetically that you could. I don't think it's impossible, but let's say it's possible. What's the probability of getting all this? Ridiculously low. So that means it's a very weak explanation. Okay? The God explanation is a much stronger because it leads you to expect this sort of thing. Okay. I've covered that. So, is there a better explanation? No. There's no explanation even as good as the God explanation in terms of plausibility, simplicity, and explanatory power. Are all these things more to be expected assuming God than not? Yes, massively, right? So the probability of all this happening by chance without God, ridiculously low. The probability of all this happening by chance, happening if God exists, is far higher. So, by the principles of scientific reasoning, the existence of the universe and the nature of the universe provide strong evidence of God. Okay, do you have questions? What have I confused you about?
Maybe we can take the ones from the chat.
Sure, we've got some online.
Ellen asks, is the theory of evolution compatible with God the Creator and special creation?
Here's, I'm going to go back to my, there might be theological reasons for saying no, but I think in the context of doing apologetics, I would assume evolution is compatible. Because I think even assume the whole story that's the prominent story among scientists, right? Big Bang and then biological evolution. And give them all that. You've got still a really powerful argument for God. So I don't really worry too much about it.
And you answered Richard's question already?
Go ahead.
Okay. That's so. Other questions, comments, puzzlements?
This isn't a puzzlement, but if you narrow it down from the universe to planet Earth, there's a fascinating video, DVD, called The Privileged Planet. Discovery Institute.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, people like Dembski and so on.
Right. Right.
But it's absolutely brilliant, and you may be interested in looking at it. There's another one on the mystery of life that goes into the DNA and all of machinery inside the cell.
Right.
Those are
So Vern was
they're
referring
both
to
available.
the Discovery Institute, which is, I remember going to a conference a few years ago where Dembski was there and others, and sort of being blown away by what I learned at that conference. So I think they've done a lot of work on this. It's very, okay, the Discovery Institute it came out of intelligent design theory, which is very controversial among philosophers and scientists. But I think you can use what they're doing even within the controversy. What's controversial is that they think it's a scientific research project. And other people think, well, it doesn't really quite fit the standards of science. You know what? I'll give them that. I don't care. Is the evidence they're pointing to provide good reasoning for the conclusion that there's an intelligent designer? And I don't care if you call it science or not. Call it philosophy. I'm good with that. So it's good reasoning. I find it really quite compelling. Yeah.
So if Copernicus' theory was accepted because it was simple, it was the simplest of the two,
Right.
why is this argument not accepted as the simpler?
Frankly, I think most people don't actually realize that how simple theism actually is.
Okay.
Like I think most people, you ask people in the street, you know, the concept of God is a simple concept or a complicated concept. I think most people would say it's complicated because they have all these, well, let's see, God is loving, God is powerful, God is all-knowing, God is omnipresent, God is, and then they start listing things, it looks like there's all kinds of different characteristics. What they don't see is that they're actually, it's sort of like all the different consequences of gravity, but it's one simple force, and so they just don't see that the concept, just how simple the concept of God is, and the idea that God is the cause of everything else. They don't see how simple it is. That's one thing. The other thing is people don't haven't really put together the power of the principle of simplicity in science, what a major factor that is, and then applied it here. Like I said that I'm indebted to Richard Swinburne here. He's really the one that's pointed this out. Right? This is a new way of looking at things. Before, philosophers used to try to prove the existence of God, like deduce, and there's always some weakness. But Swinburne says, well, let's not do it that way. Let's reason like a scientist reasons, right? And use the same kind of principle. Now, of course, you have to analyze how scientific reasoning works, and then you apply it, and that's what he's done. And that's basically what I've given you.
Also remember, too, that Copernicus's theory at that time was not well accepted at all. He had a fight on his hands trying to get that accepted.
Right. One thing you should know is that at the time of any scientific revolution, when the new point of view, the theory that wins in the end, when it's first presented, without exception, it is contrary to the evidence at the time, and it's nutty. Like, it just seems crazy. It seems bizarre. And most of the people in the field, most of the experts think it's just kind of bonkers. And they're not being stupid for thinking that, right? From the evidence they're familiar with, from their background, it just doesn't, it seems crazy. So, and I mean, including like Einstein, right? With relativity theory, it's really weird, it's bizarre. It is, it's contrary to common sense,
But even evolution is not a simple thing. If you look at any major evolutionists these days, Darwin's, let's use the term, simple explanation of evolution is not accepted by all of them. There's umpteen theories built on top of that. And every time they run into a problem, someone comes up with something else. So,
also, let's not think that, do you remember the last time I quoted from this theologian, Lutheran theologian Peter, where he said, don't overestimate or underestimate the value of apologetics, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like what people believe is just based on the evidence and reasoning. It's not like that at all, right? We have all kinds of motives, and we're driven in all kinds of different ways, and ultimately it's a spiritual thing. So I'm just giving you one, I think, really fruitful way of thinking about this. What's the simplest possible explanation of all of this? Anything else? Okay, and it'll be easier next time. So we're talking about the evidence for Jesus. Yeah, scripture. See you then.